All right, so we're sort of at the top of the hour. So I want to welcome everybody. Welcome to Tech Canada's Deeper Insights webinar series. I'm Brittany Fitzgerald, the Delta Coordinator here at Tech Canada, and I'm thrilled to be your host for today's session. I'm excited to introduce our featured speaker for today's session, Chris Quinn. Chris is a Vistage Chair and co-founder of Imprint Talent Readiness. He has a wealth of experience in revolutionizing talent strategies, and he's joining us today to share his insights and knowledge with all of you. As Chris delves into the essential strategies required to win the war for talent, we encourage you to be an active participant, whether you're joining us on Zoom or through our social media channels. Your questions and comments are valuable, offering you an opportunity to gain deeper insights into talent acquisition directly from a seasoned expert. So let's all give a warm welcome to Chris Quinn as he unveils the strategies to win the war for talent. Welcome, Chris.
Yeah, thank you, Brittany. I appreciate it. Good morning, everybody. I'm excited to spend an hour with you this morning, sharing some of the things that we've learned in our work with almost 100 business owners. And they range in size from $1 million up to $1 billion. So we've learned a lot through this work, and we'll get going and talk about the three things I really want to cover today that I think you'll find useful. The first one we're going to cover is how to use analytics and not rely on opinions when it comes to some of the talent decisions. Secondly, I'm going to spend some time talking about how you avoid what I call the sea of sameness, and we'll spend a little bit of time on that. And then I think something very exciting and I think very applicable in today's talent challenge is the how to leverage new talent pools. So these are the three areas that we're going to dive into. But before we go too deep into these topics, I want to kind of set the stage. And I got this data. I have this for the US, but I gathered it for Canada, obviously. And I think there's some interesting statistics here. And if you look at it, I happen to be a baby boomer. And in the United States, we are the biggest generation. We have, as they are in Canada, as we are in Canada. And you can see that by what the data says is by 2031, all of the baby boomers in Canada will be 65 years old, which is typically the age of retirement. And you have thousands of baby boomers retiring every day in Canada. In the US, it's like 10,000 a day. And the challenge, as you can see, just looking at the generational math, is that it's the largest generation, the baby boomers are. The next biggest generation is the millennials. And the interesting thing about the millennials is the oldest millennials are in their early 40s, and they are changing jobs every 36 months on average. And the reason they're changing jobs is because they can. There's a lot more opportunities than there are people, which is part of the challenge and why I start with the math. A lot of the owners, the business owners we work with, almost, I won't say are resentful, but are maybe resentful is the right word, about the choices that the younger generations have in terms of the work that they can do. And when I came out of the work or into the workforce in the 80s, we were probably 10 people for every job. And now literally it's flipped. Now there's 10 jobs for every person. And that creates a different dynamic. And I think that's an important place to start with the numbers, because these numbers aren't going to change. This is the reality. There are fewer people competing for more jobs, and we can resent people for it. We can complain about it, but it is the math, and it leads to the conclusion, I think, that is, or the realization that if you're going to win the war for talent, somebody else has to lose, and it's probably the first time in some of the business owners' life where people need you need them, you need the people more than they need you. And that's a difficult realization for a lot of the business owners we work with. But I wanted to start with the math, and then the question is, so what do we do with this? The math, the numbers are the numbers. So let's talk about some of the things we can do. Here's the first thing. I share this with our clients and our members. It's from Holland. I think it's kind of funny, and it's really, you're not stuck in traffic, you are traffic. And the message there is, hey, you're the problem if you don't deal with the reality. So the numbers are real. So what do we do about it? This is a screenshot I took. This is my kids when they were younger played this game. It's FIBA. It's a soccer game, PlayStation. And why am I showing this? the way we talk about this is you can see all the data that's up here for each of these players, and the children use this data to configure their teams on FIFA soccer in this PlayStation game. And so what I say to my clients and our members is, if my children are using more data to configure their teams in PlayStation than you are to hire or to make people decisions, you probably have a problem. And so that's just a little bit of humor, but I think it's true. You have to use data in today's world. So this is where we start. We want to focus on analytics and not opinions. So what do we mean? We typically, and this, I've been doing this for more than 40 years, we typically hire people for what they know, but we then fire them for who they are. And this is a challenge. So, how do we deal with this challenge? Well, the first thing we realize is that most of the job boards or the Indeeds, et cetera, they scrape the internet, they look at LinkedIn profiles, and the information they glean from profiles is typically education and work experience, sometimes skills. That's what's on those profiles. What we know about that is that information is not predictive of job success, and it changes over time. What we believe is really important to focus on, which is more stable over time and doesn't change as quickly, is both behavioral and cognitive information or data about people. So we talk about it as the briefcase, which is the skills, knowledge, and experience; the heart, which is the cultural fit, their values and interests, which is important as well. And the focus this morning is going to be more on the head, which we call where the behavioral and cognitive factors are. And that's where data comes in. So, data, using behavioral information or analysis or analytics is not just for new hiring. One of the big challenges with the Gen Z and the younger generations is they want to grow, they want to be developed. So this information that you glean can be used for helping with promotion decisions. A lot of our clients use it for lateral moves, looking at somebody who's a behavioral fit for a role in a different department. Having that information and knowing that in advance allows you to do some talent planning. Growth assignments, special assignments, and projects. So these are all ways that this data can be leveraged to help retain, because it's not enough to get new employees when they're, especially millennials and younger generation, when they're making job changes so frequently. You want to be able to retain them, and the way to retain them is to find ways to deploy them that leverages their head, their cognitive and in this case behavioral talent. This is what we call the challenge, the difference between the have to and the want to. We all talk about engagement, employee engagement. And we call it, the way we talk about that is discretionary effort. A lot of employees do the minimum, just enough to get by. Sometimes it's called quiet quitting. Obviously, what we're trying to understand is how can we activate discretionary effort in employees? What does that look like? How can we do that to improve their engagement and their performance? And so they get closer to the want to curve on this graph. We say the way you do that is you execute what is called the platinum rule. When I grew up, we had the golden rule, which was do unto others as you'd want them to do unto you. But it's the platinum rule is something different in today's world. It's really do unto others as they would want to be done unto. And that means you have to understand what that means. You have to understand what creates that discretionary effort and what activates that engagement. Well, how do you understand that? How do you figure that out early enough in the process so that you can actually do that with employees? Well, the way we talk about that in the first step is, and this is where a lot of our members or clients have a misstep, is they start with people first and then try to fit them into a job. We actually think you start with the job profile first. And what is a job profile? A job profile is gleaned typically from your exemplars. The way we talk about this when we work with folks is you want to find somebody in that job role that if you could clone them and have 10 more of them tomorrow, you would. Somebody already in that role in your company. And you want to understand their behavioral profile and an aggregate of a bunch of your exemplars and create an aggregate profile that works in your ecosystem. These A players or exemplars are really doing the job at a high level, and you'd want to get more of them if you could. So we say that you start with that profile first, and then you look at candidates or potential people for that role through the lens of that profile. On the left here, this is what it looks like. The bars look at different 4 behavioral drives, and the candidate is indicated by the line graph with the ABCD. And the point here is that you want to have a visual and actually understand how well a candidate or somebody you're moving internally matches a specific job role that you're considering them for. This is very important. It helps you start to understand the question of what activates discretionary effort in somebody. What do they need more of? What do they need less of? What we see the tendency is for managers is to project what they are motivated by onto their subordinates or onto their team members. And that often is not what motivates those people. And it's very challenging to be a manager today, to activate that discretionary effort and engagement. And understanding how well they fit the job profile and where the gaps are and what areas you might have to coach on or help them with is really important. And that's what this begins to help you understand. Where are the gaps in terms of their fit with the ideal candidate for a role or ideal job profile. So the message here is start using behavioral analytics. Don't guess. Don't use your gut. Don't rely on skills and knowledge. Those things are not predictive of job success. Focus on data that really speaks to what motivates or activates that engagement that is so important in both attracting and then retaining employees. That's the first one. If you're going to use an assessment, these are just some things. It's a list, but things you have to consider. There are tons of assessments out there. We joke it's like a dog's breakfast. There's a million different assessments that you can find. What I would recommend is you consider any assessment you vetted against these factors or this criteria before you take it on. You have to be very clear that it's obviously relevant, that it's valid and reliable, it's been tested. It doesn't have any bias, or its fairness is clear, it's defensible legally. And you don't just rely on one assessment method either. It's not one thing. It's a couple or two or three things you're going to do, including interviews and other potential skill assessments and things like that you want to put in the mix. But these are just some factors. People often ask, well, how do you know if an assessment's good? Well, I would start with this list, and I would really stress test it against some of this criteria that I'm sharing with you here. The next topic that I think is really important in today's world, and how do you stand out in a sea of sameness? And I'll share a little bit about what I mean. This is actually, it's not a great screenshot, but if you have access to Indeed, you can see this yourself. This is from one of my clients, and they are in the construction industry, and they were looking to hire a project manager. And so they initially started posting, and when we went into Indeed, looked at the posting, there were probably 20 pages that looked like this, where everything said project manager, and it all looked very similar. There was no differentiation. So anybody going in there to look for a job would see 20 pages of project management. Well, guess what happens when all the jobs look the same? How do you think candidates sort them? What do you think they tend to lean on when they think everything looks the same? What you don't want them to do, which is look at salary or compensation. They start sorting based on that. And then we wonder why we make them sensitive to pay, because we don't create any differentiation. We don't do anything that makes our role stand out typically. And so with our construction company, this is the thing we did with them. We said, well, how are we going to stand out? How can you kind of rise above the sea of sameness when it comes to looking for standing out in project management role? And this is what they did. I'm not saying this is right for you, but this is what was right for them. They actually changed the headline and said, change it to Warrior Wanted. And then they said construction project manager. So, people right away, as you can imagine, like a subject line in an email. And frankly, it's like good marketing, right? You have something that it makes people curious. It makes you stand out and say, oh, that's interesting. Let me read about that. And if you look down at the description, don't know if you can read it. Do you have a warrior spirit? We're looking for a motivated and driven construction project manager. Well, this is interesting because once this change was made, the candidate flow increased incredibly. And I think a lot of it was just the change in terms of something that was unique, something that stood out and really set them apart in terms of the other descriptions or other jobs that were posted in this case in the Indeed portal. So this is something we see a lot with our clients. They don't do anything to differentiate themselves. And I think one of the messages for human resource people or talent executives is that you need to think a lot more like a sales and marketing executive. When you have a limited supply, you have to stand out. You can't allow yourself to be commoditized. So everything you do in your talent efforts has to be with a marketing mindset. And that's where this starts. Part of it is like marketers use data. We just covered that. The other piece is, how do you stand out? How do you have a message? How do you have a message that's is unique and interesting to your target audience? So this is a real world example from one of our clients, and worked very successfly. And I think if you go on Indeed and you look at all the postings, you'll probably see what we saw, which was a sea of sameness. So the challenge I would say to you is, if that's you, figure out what's going to make you stand out or stand apart from the herd, and create some differentiation, so you can get people to at least be curious. Because if they can't find you, you can't talk to them. So you got to start with how you're going to stand out and be unique and meaningful to your target audience. Same question marketers have to answer. This is another topic that I'm going to spend a little bit of time on, because I think it's really exciting. How do we leverage new talent pools? What's the issue first? And we see this, and I'll go back to my construction example. We have a lot of clients we work with in that industry. Is when you have a talent pool and everyone's fishing there, what happens to the cost of fish? It goes up. And what happens, sometimes the fish get recirculated. So you get a lot of people who move from company to company. And quite candidly, you start overpaying for B talent, because everyone's kind of competing for the same talent, and they end up hiring somebody, maybe paying more than what the person is worth in some cases. And so the question is, why don't we fish somewhere else? Why are we going to the same pond as everyone else? Why are we going back to the same construction pool if we're looking for project manager or superintendents? Well, what's the challenge? The challenge is, if you go outside that pool, you're going to find a lot of skinny resumes. And what do we mean by skinny resume? We mean you're going to see people that don't have relevant or limited work experience in construction if you go to a different talent pool. And you're going to ask yourself, well, how can they learn the job? They don't know anything about construction project management. How do we know that they're going to be able to be successful if we went outside the talent pool and actually hired someone from a different industry? Fair questions. So I'm going to start with this quote from Alvin Toffler, who was a futurist, and I love it. And I think it's really encapsulates what we're talking about here. The illiterate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. I love that, because I think what it speaks to is, with the rate of change that we have in our work environment, in our industries, you need employees who are really adept at and flexible at learning. They have to be agile learners. And the question is, can you know that? Can you know if somebody has learning agility? Is that part of their DNA? And I'm making the assertion this morning that that is one of the most important attributes in today's work and talent environment to know about a candidate or about an employee. So what is learning agility? Yeah, so like it sounds, right? Ability to quickly adapt and learn to new situations or challenges. And it's general cognitive ability, and it's called G. It's not intelligence. So the way I would talk about it, intelligence would be the size of the sponge. It's not the size of the sponge we're talking about. It's the absorption rate of the sponge. So think about it that way. It's really, or the size of the computer, it's the processing speed of the computer. So it's not intelligence, but it's learning speed or learning agility. And that's called G, and that is measurable. And I'm going to share a little bit about it right now. But it allows you to understand people's ability to acquire new knowledge, new competencies and skills. And you can imagine how that can be applied. We'll share a little bit more about it. This is something from the American Psychologist Journal in 2001 that speaks about cognitive and learning agility. And I thought it'd be interesting and everyone could relate to it. If you headaches and ibuprofen, what is the correlation? Everybody knows statistically correlation is, how strong is the relationship between two variables. The strongest perfect correlation is 1.0. What's the correlation between ibuprofen and pain relief? It's 0.18. And you go, that's interesting. Here's another one that maybe you can relate to. What's the correlation between the distance from the equator and daily temperature? Obviously, you'd think that to be pretty strong. The closer to the equator, you'd impact on the temperature. That correlation is pretty strong. It's 0.6. And you know the answer here. What's the correlation between cognitive ability, or G, and job performance? 0.65. This is from American Psychologists in 2001. That's pretty astounding, right? So this 0.65 is a very strong correlation. And I have not run into many companies who are leveraging cognitive ability or measuring it to understand both their current talent and candidates that they're considering and hiring. So I'll tell you a story here, just really quickly, about how it was applied by one of our clients. Lowe's is a big hardware, big box retailer down here. And skinny jeans, what does that have to do with anything? You're probably wondering. We have a construction company again out in East Carolina that was looking to hire a superintendent, and they were frustrated. They didn't want to hire anybody from a large construction company and overpay and have to unteach them or teach them, break some of their habits. They have a unique culture. And so we talked about using behavioral and cognitive testing or assessing as a way to find new candidates. And my client was funny. He said, I don't want to, I'm really worried that we're going to find some latte drinking, skinny jean wearing person, in Raleigh who's going to fit the profile. I'll be nervous to hire him. That's why I'm showing you the skinny jeans. It was kind of funny. That was his fear. But what happened was we actually found somebody who was a candidate who had no background in construction, but was actually working at Lowe's in the big superstore. And it ended up being one of their best superintendents because he had a very high cognitive. He was the behavioral fit for the role, no work experience, no resume that would make you select that person at all. Wouldn't probably even interview him. Most companies would have said in their posting, need 5+ years experience in construction. Somebody like this would have never been on the radar. And I think that's a mistake that a lot of our clients make as well, is they put constraints on the posting. Chris Zarnak, who is a author, I'll share a little bit about his book later, who I really believe is a thought leader in this area, said that in job posting, he recommends you post and say no experience preferred, which is quite contrarian to what most postings actually look like. We limit the talent pool right away because we go to the same pool and then we put constraints like, well, we got to have 5 or 7 years work experience. And then we wonder why we have a hard time finding candidates. So to unlock that, to kind of shift the paradigm and actually think differently, using the cognitive and behavioral, you can fish in new ponds. You can actually go to new places to find candidates and actually say things like Chris Zarnak suggests, like no experience preferred. We'd rather teach you. We'd rather, bring you into our culture and pour into you. And with a confidence that if we do pour into you, you're going to absorb those skills and be able to apply them because we know you have the cognitive or the learning agility that will allow that to happen quickly. So that's one story of cognitive. There are many, but I thought you would enjoy that because what astounds me is how many candidates we don't even talk to that could be a potential good fit. And this obviously, or maybe not obviously, also applies internally. You want to move people and you want to retain them. You have people probably in a department that you might not consider sourcing candidates from for another department that have the cognitive and behavioral fit. You already know they fit your culture and the values. So those are also candidates for development and promotion using data to help you confirm that. So the issue with cognitive is, obviously what we're dealing with, and not every job maybe is that complex. Really, cognitive is really, really important when you have changing business environment. There's a lot of stuff that's rapidly changing. That's when cognitive is really important, or when you go to a new talent pool, especially when you bring in somebody from a new industry in, and they don't have on paper the relevant job experience or work experience that you seek. So what is so good about cognitive adaptability? It's, obviously with changing dynamics in the industry, and we've all gone through COVID, there's a lot of change going on. Adaptability is an attribute that's very appealing in an employee. The ability to solve problems, high cognitive ability or learning agility is really comes or is paired with the ability to solve complex problems, which, a lot of times when we're talking about jobs, we want people that can do that. Future proofing, what does that mean? That means that these people are a little bit fungible or like chameleons, they can adapt. And so if you talk about things changing in your industry, your company, you have strategic changes, these people are very flexible. They're people with a high cognitive ability. They can flex and morph into different areas that you need to strengthen. Clearly faster onboarding, learning agility, time to peak performance. Especially you think about sales roles, it might take 7 months to get somebody up to the place where they're break even. High cognitive learning agility might get somebody there in half that time. Their ability to absorb the information, learn about the solutions or products in the industry, and then apply that. What's interesting is the leadership potential, how one of the things that we find in high performing leaders is they tend to have a high cognitive score. And a lot of that's because of their ability to adapt again and welcome kind of the ambiguity that comes with leadership and not intimidated by that. Risk mitigation, they're better equipped to navigate challenges and mitigate risk. Employee engagement, they're going to be more fulfilled and satisfied that they're actually being challenged in success in complex roles. I talked about that a little earlier. Obviously, diverse skill sets. Over time, they could add more arrows in their quiver, so to speak, and build more capabilities because they have that thirst for learning and the capacity to absorb it and apply it. And then for a company to have a competitive advantage, I mean, you have a bunch of people that are very flexible, can be deployed differently in different roles and grow across the organization. They have more knowledge of the different functions. It can give you a competitive advantage as an organization. This is the book I referenced. Chris Zarnak, Winning the War for Talent. He's a VISI speaker. He is somebody that I think is a thought leader in this area. He's influenced a lot of my thinking. And I definitely encourage you, if you haven't read this book or gone down this path to explore some of his teaching, I would encourage you to do so. All right. I have time for questions. I hope there are some questions. I'm open to answer them. If I provoke some thinking or some controversy, whatever's on your mind, I'd love to have a conversation with you and address some of your concerns or questions.
All right, Chris, just seeing if my camera will turn on. There we
That's
go.
all right. We're good. We're good.
No questions at this time. We do have over 100 viewers on LinkedIn Live. Oh, one just popped in.
Okay.
Do you have a cognitive assessment you would recommend?
Yeah, there are many. I mean, there are many. I'll start with that. I would vet them against that criteria I mentioned earlier, but we used the predictive index cognitive assessment for learning agility, for the G, for G measurement. Yes.
Awesome, thank you. We do have just a great comment from Doug Wilson on LinkedIn. Such great content, Chris. You always bring it. But this is another great reminder. If anyone has any questions, please submit them in the chat or comment on LinkedIn, and Chris will be able to answer them live for you. All righty. So we have a couple more questions that have come through, Chris. Don't know what's happening with my camera. Anyways, I'll just get started.
Yeah,
is there much of a difference between the different cognitive tests, such as culture index?
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't think culture index has a cognitive. They have a behavioral for sure. It's very similar to the predictive index. They were kind of derived from the predictive index. I don't believe they have a cognitive or a G measurement, learning agility. Not everybody does. There are some that all they have is that. They don't have the behavioral and cognitive. There are some companies that have just the cognitive. But yeah, that's my understanding, that they do not have the cognitive as part of their mix.
All righty. From Matthew, interestingly, I call the ability to acquire new knowledge and the speed at which it happens intelligence.
Hmm.
Can you tell me a little bit more on what you would define as intelligence?
Yeah, well, intelligence, so I'll put it to you this way. It's a good question, and it's interesting on how it shows up when we do the cognitive assessment. We have a lot of engineers that are very bright, and the cognitive, just to give you a little backdrop, is a 50 question, 12-minute assessment. So the questions come at you fast. And interesting enough, as you might imagine, engineers have a high attention to detail genetically. I mean, they just are very processed and very systematic. So what typically happens is they will get 18 out of 19 right and score very low because there happen to be 50 questions, and you don't get scored on 18 out of 19. You get scored on how many right you get. So somebody like me who's not an engineer, I might take it and get 35 right, and I'll score higher because I answered more questions. And so the answer is intelligence. What we're measuring has a time component to it, right? Intelligence doesn't. Like if you gave people all day to do the assessment, a lot of intelligent people would get 50 out of 50, but we're not measuring kind of what they know. We're measuring what they can apply quickly, what they can, discern and apply in a rapid fashion. That's why it's called learning agility. So you can have very intelligent people who score low, quote unquote, on learning agility. It doesn't have anything to do to disparage their intelligence. It just says they're a lot more methodical, a lot more systematic in the way they derive answers or come to conclusions. Is that helpful?
I think so. I think that's very interesting. I think that answered that question. Thank you, Matthew, for that. Is the Canadian and American talent situation different in any way?
That's a good question. I can't honestly say that I'm not an expert on Canada. I can't say that. I think you have some of the demographics we have, and that's why I started with your population numbers. And then I did some research in the Canadian, some of the workforce studies. The dynamics we have here are very similar, and baby boomers retiring here at 10 to 12,000 a day, and it's hard to replace that because they're the largest generation. And then the generations that follow are, there aren't just the math in the United States is there are 8.5 million fewer people in the workforce than there were, 10 years ago. And it got masked a little bit in the United States during the recession because the recession kind of depressed hiring. And so the population math wasn't as obvious until the economy started kicking in again. And I'm not sure, to be honest, if that happened in Canada to the same magnitude, but I do see you have the same dynamics in terms of the baby boomer population being the biggest and the millennials being the next. And the challenge is, the millennials change jobs about every 36 months. They don't want security. They want flexibility. That's what they're looking for. And so the challenge for companies is how can you not only hire them, but engage them? And that's why it's so important, the engagement and activating that to retain people, to grow them and give them and to have understanding about what's the best way to grow them, to challenge them, right? So yeah, that's not maybe satisfactory, but I think the dynamics are very similar. I think the scale's different, obviously, but the math is very similar.
Oh, no, that's wonderful to know. We do have Matthew coming back from the
All right.
previous question, and he just said, to answer, how can I leverage this tool to enhance my team's performance and gain deeper insights into their dynamics, despite not having utilized it for hiring purposes previously?
Yeah, no, that's good. I think for a team that's intact, like you've already got them on board, I think it'll help you coach them better and really understand, hey, maybe there's things that you can do to activate certain employees differently. We tend to guess. There's two things we do. We either guess or we project what motivates us, which is natural. I like that. I like independence, so I'll let you be independent. And you may find out that doesn't work for somebody. They want more collaborative, kind of work. And so having that, I'll call it blood work on everybody, gives you a chance to see not only individually, but collectively, what does the team look like? Because a lot of times when we look at individuals and we roll them up and look at the team, we'll find that there are gaps in the team. Like we're a lot more homogeneous than we thought. We have a lot more similarities, which isn't always good, right? We have some leadership teams that we do this on, and they're all mavericks. They're all, all gas and no brake pedal. And they want, we always joke, we wonder why they don't finish anything because they get distracted because they don't have anybody who's more steady on the leadership team or somebody with a brake pedal. And so sometimes it helps you find diversity and say, next time we hire somebody, we need to get somebody who has a little bit more of this so we can create a little bit more balance in the team. And that's interesting too, because then when you look at candidates, it's not only the individual and the job role, it's also what is the team they're a part of? What do they add to the team, right? They might bring something new to the team, which is also compelling beyond their fit in the job role that you're hiring for.
Yeah, and this is obviously just more of an addition of a comment, but interesting enough, IQ is still one of the best predictors of where you fit in the job market. And an IQ test is not only about getting the right answers, but also about getting them quick, which supports your thesis previously. And I have another comment here. Are there any jobs that you would feel G is not the right assessment?
It's a good question. We have a lot of manufacturers that have like plant, I'll call them we call them blue collar or maybe entry level in the plant role, hourly work. I would, so you might find that that's not relevant unless it's complex, like we have some machine shops that do very complex aerospace work. The degree of specialty or the degree of complexity of the work would be a factor. I think the complexity is something you'd want to overlay on that conversation when you say, do we really need to apply this, right? People are reticent to create any barriers to people applying. Like, oh boy, if they have to take a 12-minute assessment, it feels like a test. They might be reticent to apply, right? So I think you want to be careful about how you deploy it. I think it's interesting to know about your current employees, just so you can understand what's the best way to develop them and where else, they might have more capacity than you imagined to learn, and maybe they can be, moved from finance into a marketing role. And you'd never think about that, naturally. But yeah, so I'd look at complexity as the filter for applying cognitive. So we don't recommend you do it on every job for sure. And that's how we talk about it with our clients.
Okay, no, thank you very much. Have you seen AI used to assist in recruiting?
Yeah, it's interesting. So we've seen it in a couple ways. One way that's interesting that it's probably been one of the earlier manifestations of it is in generating interview questions. So here's how that works. Remember I showed you the target job match and the candidate fit? Well, the computer or the AI looks at the fit of the candidate and then generates behavioral interview questions based on the gaps and based on the apparent strengths. And so that's one way AI can look at a candidate and tee up a bunch of behavioral questions just based on what we call their match score to the target profile, which is pretty cool, right? Because it says, hey, behavioral interviewing is the way we recommend people go is look for behaviors that people can describe, and the AI actually tees those up automatically based on the match score. So that's one way it's been used for sure in recruiting for with our clients.
No, that's wonderful. AI can be super handy at some times. I don't think we have any more questions that are coming in at this time. But at the beginning, I do like that pro tip that you gave of branding your job titles. Make it unique. Absolutely. And just wanted to say thank you so much, Chris, for this engaging webinar and the timely information that we can all take away for talent acquisition, and making sure that our Tech Canada members from across the country can leave with actionable takeaways right after this. And the quote from Alvin Toffler, that really resonated with me. The literate of the 21st century will not be those who cannot read and write, but those who cannot learn, unlearn, and relearn. So I really enjoyed that, Chris. And I wanted to let everyone know on this call that it's a reminder that this webinar has been recorded and will be up on our website within the next 48 hours at tech-canada.com. So thank you so much, Chris, for your time. Thank you for everyone who tuned into the call, and we look forward to our next webinar in 2 weeks. So thank you, Chris.
Thank you.
Take care. Bye-bye.